The forest was a cage of shadows and whispers. Tonight, the usual chirps of crickets and the hoot of distant owls were drowned out by a much more desperate sound, the ragged gasps of a girl running for her life. Her name was Nova, and the soft earth beneath her bare feet was cold and unforgiving. Twigs, like bony fingers, snatched at her torn clothes and scratched the pale skin of her arms. Every breath was a sharp pain in her side, but she didn't dare stop. The memory of the angry shouts and cruel laughter from her own pack, the night fangs, echoed in her ears, pushing her forward even as her legs trembled with exhaustion. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the wolf world. To her pack, that meant she was meant to be quiet, to obey without question, and to accept whatever life they decided for her. And the life they had decided was a terrible one. Bram, a hulking, mean-spirited warrior from an allied pack, had demanded she become his mate. Her alpha had agreed, seeing it as a useful bargain, a way to gain more fighters. Nova's feelings didn't matter. When she had cried and refused, they had locked her in a small shed, telling her she would stay there until she changed her mind. The cold, damp darkness had been the final push. Using a loose board, she had squeezed out and fled into the unknown, with nothing but the thin dress on her back and a heart pounding with fear. The wind picked up, howling through the tall pines, and with it came a new, terrifying sound, the distant howls of the search party. They were coming for her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. She ran faster, her tears mixing with the chilly night air. She had no plan, no destination. Any direction away from them was the only goal. The trees began to thin and suddenly her foot caught on a hidden root. She tumbled forward, landing hard on the damp ground, the air knocked from her lungs. For a long moment she just lay there, sobbing quietly, ready to give up. This was it. The forest would claim her, or her pack would find her and drag her back to a fate that felt worse than death. As she pushed herself up, wiping mud and tears from her face, a flicker of light caught her eye through the dense trees. It wasn't the harsh, orange glow of a torch. It was a soft, warm, golden light. Hope, a feeling she hadn't felt in so long, sparked weakly inside her. She forced her aching body to move, crawling and then stumbling towards the light. The trees gave way to a small clearing and there it was. A cabin. It was made of dark logs, with a stone chimney puffing gentle gray smoke into the sky. The light came from a window where the flicker of candlelight danced against the glass. It looked like a dream, a picture of safety and warmth in the middle of the cold, scary night. She crept closer, her heart now pounding for a different reason. What if whoever lived here was just as dangerous? But the howls sounded again, closer this time, and the fear of what was behind her was greater than the fear of what was ahead. She reached the heavy wooden door. Her hand, shaking violently, hovered over the rough iron handle. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she turned it. The door swung inward with a soft creak. The warmth that rushed out to meet her was so comforting it almost made her cry again. She slipped inside, quickly and quietly closing the door behind her, leaning against it as if to block out the entire world. The inside of the cabin was even more wonderful than the outside. It was one single room, cozy and filled with the rich smell of wood smoke and something else, something spicy and clean like pine needles. A fire crackled happily in a large stone fireplace, its light dancing over shelves of books, a thick fur rug and a large, comfortable-looking bed in the corner. Several candles placed around the room made the whole space feel alive and golden. It was a safe haven. It was perfect. Suddenly, a deep voice cut through the silence, rough and full of authority. "Who are you?" Nova jumped, pressing herself harder against the door. A man emerged from the shadows near the fireplace. He was enormous, tall and broad-shouldered, with muscles that strained against the fabric of his simple shirt. His hair was dark and a little messy, and his eyes, a startling, intense shade of gold, were fixed on her. He was the most powerful-looking person she had ever seen. He was Lucian, the Alpha of the Thunder Ridge Pack, the sworn enemies of her own people. "You are trespassing on my land," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the small space. He took a step forward and Nova flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for him to throw her out or worse. "Please," she begged, her voice a broken whisper. She opened her eyes, letting him see the sheer terror in them. "Please don't make me go back out there. Don't stop me from staying here. I need this. I need to be safe." The words tumbled out. "My pack, they're horrible. They want to force me to marry someone awful. They locked me up. I ran. I have nowhere else to go." She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop her body from shaking. Lucian stared at her, his expression unreadable. His instincts as an alpha were screaming at him. This girl was from an enemy pack. She was a problem, a risk. But she was also small, shivering, and her fear was so real he could smell it in the air. And beneath the scent of fear in the forest, there was something else, a soft, sweet scent that was uniquely her. It called to something deep inside him, to the primal part of him that was built to protect, to provide. His wolf, usually so fierce and guarded, was quiet, watching her with a strange sense of calm. He looked at her tear-streaked face, her wide, pleading eyes, and the way she seemed so small and lost in his cabin. The anger in his golden eyes slowly faded, replaced by a reluctant understanding. He let out a long, slow breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. "All right," he said, his voice much softer now, almost gentle. "You can stay." He walked over to a chest and pulled out a thick, warm wool blanket. He held it out to her, not coming too close, as if trying not to scare a frightened animal. "For one night. You can sleep by the fire." Nova reached out a trembling hand and took the blanket. The rough wool was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt. She pulled it around her shoulders, the warmth immediately beginning to seep into her cold bones. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Lucian just gave a short nod, watching as she slowly, carefully, sat down on the fur rug in front of the fireplace. The flames painted her face in light and shadow. For the first time since she could remember, the tight knot of fear in her chest began to loosen, just a little. The storm outside, both the one in the sky and the one chasing her, felt very far away. Inside the candlelit cabin, there was only warmth, quiet, and the beginning of something new. The first pale light of dawn was just beginning to color the sky when Nova's eyes fluttered open. For a single disorienting moment she didn't know where she was. The deep, soft fur beneath her cheek was not the scratchy straw of her bed in the Nightfang village. The air smelled of wood smoke and man, not damp earth and fear. Then memory returned in a rush and she sat up abruptly, the warm blanket pooling around her waist. She looked towards the large bed in the corner, her heart thudding. It was empty, the blankets neatly pulled up. A fresh, cold dread trickled into her. Had he changed his mind? Had he left to tell someone she was here? The cabin door opened then and Lucian ducked inside, bringing with him a gust of cool morning air. He saw she was awake and gave her a brief, unreadable look. In his hands he carried 2 dead rabbits, their fur speckled with dew. "You're still here?" he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question, more a statement of fact. "Where else would I go?" Nova replied, her voice small. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, a shield against both the chill and his intense presence. He didn't answer, instead moving to the small counter to clean his catch. Nova watched him for a while, the silence between them thick and heavy. It wasn't an entirely comfortable silence, but it wasn't hostile either. It was simply there, a space they were both occupying. Feeling a need to be useful, to not be a burden, she stood up, folding the blanket with care. Can I help?" she asked tentatively. Lucian paused, looking at her over his shoulder. "You seem to consider it. There's wood that needs splitting behind the cabin," he said finally. "But stay close to the walls. Don't go into the open. Sound carries." The simple instruction felt like a gift. It was a small task, but it was a purpose. Nodding, Nova went outside. The air was crisp and clean. She found the woodpile and the axe, its handle worn smooth from use. The work was hard, and her arms, unused to such labor, soon began to ache. But with each log she split, with each piece she added to the neat stack, she felt a little stronger, a little more real. She was doing something. She was contributing. She wasn't just a runaway anymore. She was someone who could chop wood for the fire that warmed her. When she came back inside, sweating slightly, Lucian had the rabbits cooking in a pot over the fire. A rich, savory smell began to fill the cabin. He glanced at her, at the slight sheen on her forehead, and gave a barely perceptible nod of approval. It was a tiny gesture, but it sent a warm flush through her that had nothing to do with the fire. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the small wooden table. The stew was simple, but it was the most delicious, filling meal Nova could remember having. No one had ever cooked for her before. In her pack, omegas were always the last to eat, often getting the scraps. The days began to fall into a quiet, secret rhythm. Lucian would leave for a few hours each day to tend to his patrols and his pack duties, always returning with a stern reminder for her to remain hidden and silent. And Nova did. She began to care for the cabin. She swept the hard earth floor with a makeshift broom of twigs. She dusted the few shelves, carefully handling his books and the smooth, strange trinkets he had collected. She found herbs hanging to dry and began to use them in the meals she prepared for when he returned. It became their unspoken agreement. He provided safety and food, she provided a clean, warm space and a hot meal. One afternoon, as a gentle rain pattered on the roof, they found themselves talking. It started with simple things. He asked her about the herbs she was using. She asked him about a strange, twisted piece of driftwood he used as a doorstop. Then, slowly, the conversation deepened. "It must be lonely out here," Nova said softly, looking into the flames. "So far from the rest of your pack." Lucian was sharpening a knife by the fire, the rhythmic scrape of stone on metal a familiar sound now. "It's quiet," he corrected, though not harshly. "An alpha is never alone. There are always voices, demands, problems. This place, it's for silence." He looked at her. "What about your pack? Was it always bad?" Nova finished for him, a sad smile touching her lips. "Not always. When I was very small it was okay. But as I got older and they realized I wouldn't be a strong fighter, I became less than everyone else. An Omega is like a tool. You use it until it breaks, then you get another one." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I just wanted to be seen as a person. Not a tool. Not a bargaining chip." Lucian was quiet for a long time. "In my pack," he said, his voice low and serious, "everyone has a place. A purpose. Strength is important, yes. But so is loyalty. So is a good heart. A pack is a family. It should protect its weakest members, not prey on them." The way he said it, with such conviction, made Nova's throat feel tight. It was the world she had always dreamed of but never believed could be real. The days turned into a week. The strange, powerful pull between them grew stronger with every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every glance held a moment too long. It was a constant, humming energy in the cabin, a connection that felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. Nova found herself noticing the way the firelight caught the gold in his eyes, the quiet strength in his hands, the rare, surprising gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. One evening, after a particularly tense day where Lucian had returned grim-faced, reporting that the Night Fang search parties were getting bolder, they were sitting on the fur rug. The tension of the outside world was a heavy blanket in the room. Nova was feeling the weight of it, the guilt that her presence was putting him in danger. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Lucian looked at her, his gaze intense. "Look at me, Nova." She did. "You are not trouble." He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and his fingers gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek. The touch was electric. A jolt, warm and shocking, passed through both of them. It was the first time he had intentionally touched her. His hand was rough and calloused, but his touch was incredibly soft. Nova's breath hitched. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them, to the feel of his skin against hers. The air crackled with the unspoken thing that had been growing for days. She leaned into his touch, her eyes wide, full of wonder and a little fear. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Lucian leaned forward. His other hand came up to cradle her face. Nova's heart was beating so fast she felt lightheaded. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, her eyes fluttering closed. When his lips met hers, it was not a fierce or demanding kiss. It was gentle. It was a question. It was an answer. It was a promise. It was soft and searching, a perfect, silent conversation that said everything their words could not. In that kiss, she felt the strength she admired and the gentleness she craved. She felt seen, she felt cherished, she felt like she was home. For a long moment after the kiss ended, they simply stayed there, foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air. The dangerous world outside, their rival packs, all of it melted away. There was only the crackle of the fire, the warmth of his hands on her face, and the profound, unshakable certainty that had settled in both their hearts. This was where she belonged. He was where she belonged. The peace was shattered by a sudden, sharp knock on the cabin door. They sprang apart, the spell broken. Lucian's face instantly hardened into the mask of the Alpha. His eyes flashed with warning to Nova, who scrambled silently into the shadows behind a large storage trunk, her hand pressed to her lips, which still tingled from his kiss. Lucian stood, squaring his shoulders, and opened the door. His beta, a serious-faced man named Rylan, stood in the rain. "Lucian," Rylan said, his voice urgent. "We have a problem. The Night Fangs. They're at the border. They're demanding to search our territory. They say one of their Omegas is missing, and they believe she's hiding here." The heavy wooden door closed with a thud that felt like a death sentence. The warm, golden world of the cabin, which just moments before had felt like the only real thing in existence, now seemed fragile and thin as glass. Nova stayed frozen in the shadows behind the trunk, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she was sure the beta outside could hear it. The rain pattered a frantic rhythm on the roof, mirroring the panic rising within her. She could hear the low, tense murmur of the men's voices just beyond the door, but the words were lost to the roaring in her ears. "They're here. They found me." The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. All the old fears came rushing back, threatening to drown out the memory of Lucian's kiss, the feeling of his hands on her face. Inside, Lucian stood with his back to the door, his fists clenched. Ryland's news had landed like a physical blow. The Night Fangs were not just searching, they were at his border, making formal demands. This was no longer a secret he could keep in a remote cabin. This was a direct challenge to his authority, a spark thrown onto the dry tinder of their long-standing rivalry. He could feel the weight of his pack, of centuries of tradition and conflict, pressing down on him. The easy right thing would be to give her up. To hand over the Omega from the enemy pack and avoid a war. It was what any other Alpha would do. It was what the Lucian of 2 weeks ago would have done without a second thought. But that was before. Before he knew the sound of her soft laughter. Before he saw the way she carefully folded a blanket. Before he tasted the salt of her tears and felt the perfect, shocking rightness of her lips against his. She wasn't just an Omega from an enemy pack. She was Nova. And she was his. He turned, his golden eyes finding her in the dimness. She had crept out from her hiding place, standing small and pale by the fire. The look on her face shattered the last of his hesitation. It was pure, selfless terror, but not for herself. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lucian, I can't be the reason a war starts. People will get hurt. Your pack, they'll get hurt because of me." She took a step toward the door, her body trembling with the effort of her decision. "Maybe I can talk to them. Maybe I can make a deal." "Don't." The word was a command, but it was wrapped in a tenderness that made fresh tears spring to her eyes. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his large hands coming up to frame her face, forcing her to look at him. "Don't you dare," he repeated, his voice softer now, a low, intimate rumble. "Don't stop believing in this. In us. I need this. I need you. Do you understand me, Nova? You are my mate." The word hung in the air between them, sacred and powerful. Mate. It was more than a feeling, more than a choice. It was a truth written in their very souls, a bond that his wolf had recognized from the first moment she stumbled, cold and frightened, into his sanctuary. To deny it would be to deny the core of who he was. "But your pack, the fighting?" she protested, her hands coming up to clutch his wrists, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world falling apart. "Let me worry about my pack," he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. "We will face this together. As one. I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." The decision was made. The path was clear, and it led not away from the conflict, but directly through its heart. Lucian spent the next hour in quiet, intense preparation. He sent Ryland back to the border with specific, firm instructions. He then turned to Nova, not as a protector to a victim but as a partner. He told her about his pack's customs, about the elders who valued honor above all else, about the warriors who respected strength but revered loyalty. He wasn't preparing her to be a sacrifice. He was preparing her to be his equal, to stand beside him when the time came. That time came the next morning. The sky was a cold, hard blue, the storm having washed the world clean. At the edge of the Thunder Ridge territory, where the ancient standing stones marked the border, 2 worlds stood facing each other. On one side were the Night Fangs, led by their hulking alpha, Boren. They were a grim, snarling group, their postures aggressive, their eyes glowing with hostility. Bram, the warrior Nova was meant to marry, stood at the front, his lip curled in a sneer. On the other side stood the Thunder Ridge pack. They were calm, their formation disciplined and strong. And at their head stood Lucian. But he was not alone. Beside him, her small hand clasped firmly in his, stood Nova. A ripple of shock went through both crowds. Whispers and growls erupted from the Night Fangs. Even Lucian's own pack looked on in stunned silence. Boren stepped forward, his voice a thunderous boom. "Lucian, you dishonor this truce ground. You shelter our runaway property. Hand her over and we will leave in peace." Lucian did not even flinch. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the clearing with unwavering authority. "She is not your property, Boren. And she is not a runaway. She has sought, and has been granted, sanctuary in Thunder Ridge." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over both packs. Then he lifted their joined hands high for all to see. "But more than that, she is my fated mate. The moon herself has woven our souls together. To deny this is to deny the will of the gods. To try and take her is to declare war not just on me but on fate itself. The silence that fell was absolute. It was a claim that could not be lightly made or dismissed. A fated mate bond was the highest, most sacred connection in their world. Bram let out a roar of fury and took a threatening step forward. But Borin held out an arm, stopping him. The older Alpha's eyes were narrowed, calculating. He looked at Nova, not as a piece of lost property but for the first time as a person. He saw the way she stood, not cowering, but with her shoulders back and her chin held high, her trust in Lucian shining in her eyes. He saw the way Lucian stood as her shield and her foundation. He saw the truth of it. The tension stretched, thin and sharp as a blade. Then Borin spoke again, his voice quieter but no less intense. A fated mate bond between an Alpha and an Omega, from rival packs. He shook his head, a strange, almost odd expression on his face. It is unheard of. But to fight against a true bond, it is a fight we cannot win and a curse we would not survive. He looked at his own furious pack members, then back at Lucian and Nova. The Night Fang pack, we will stand down. The girl, Nova, is under your protection. It was not a blessing but it was a truce. It was an end to the hunt. As the Night Fangs, grumbling and confused, retreated back into the trees, a collective breath was released. Lucian turned to his own pack. He saw the questions in their eyes, the uncertainty. He began to speak, his voice filled with a passion they had never heard from him before. He spoke of a new future, not of walls and borders but of bridges. He spoke of strength found in gentleness, and of a pack that was strong enough to protect the most vulnerable among them. He spoke of Nova not as a weakness he had found, but as the strength he had been missing. And as he spoke he wove a new story for them all, a story of unity that started with this one, impossible love. Weeks later, under the brilliant, shimmering light of a full moon, the two packs gathered again at the Standing Stones. But this time it was not for conflict. It was for a joining. Lucian and Nova stood before the ancient stones, hands clasped, as the shaman recited the old words. They pledged themselves to each other, their vows simple, powerful, and filled with a love that had literally changed the world around them. When Lucian kissed her, it was not a stolen moment in a hidden cabin, but a promise made before their entire united family, a seal on their new beginning. Nova, who had spent her life feeling invisible, was now seen by all. She was no longer the Omega runaway. She was Nova, the Alpha's mate, the one who had tamed the fierce heart of Lucian and in doing so, had brought an end to a generations-long war. The gentle strength he had seen in her from the beginning became the guiding light for their new, united pack. And in the quiet moments, in their candlelit cabin that was no longer a hiding place but a home, they knew that sometimes, the greatest strength is not in fighting what you fear, but in having the courage to embrace what you love. Their story is just one of many. If you loved following the journey of Lucian and Nova, of how a gentle heart tamed a fierce Alpha and brought two enemy packs together, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel for more epic werewolf romance stories, where love is the most powerful magic of all.